The Great Hall of Korath, Prime, stretched for nearly a kilometer in every direction, and the young cadets who filled its seats came from 12 different species across the known galaxy. Commander Yeltris stood at the central platform with her 4 arms folded behind her back, and her crystalline scales caught the light from the massive display screens that surrounded them all. She was Vithani, and her people had served as military instructors for the Galactic Assembly for 3,000 years today. She would give the final briefing to this new cohort before they shipped out to their first assignments, and she had given this speech hundreds of times before, but there was one part she always dreaded. You have learned tactics and strategy and weapon systems, she said, and her voice carried across the vast chamber through the translation matrices that allowed every species to understand her words. You have trained your bodies and minds for combat, and you have proven yourselves worthy of serving your peoples in the defense of civilized space. The cadets sat straighter in their seats, and pride filled their faces. Yeltris turned and gestured to the massive holographic map that appeared behind her, and it showed the entire known galaxy with each territory marked in different colors. These are the boundaries you must respect and the threats you must understand. She continued. The Vorlathi hegemony in the Outer Rim remains hostile but contained, and the Crescent pirates operate in these shipping lanes and require constant patrol. She went through each region with practiced efficiency and explained the political situations and military considerations that every officer needed to know. Then she reached the small sector that glowed red near the galactic center, human space. She said, and her voice changed in a way that made several cadets lean forward, unlike every other region she had discussed. This one had no tactical data displayed and no fleet numbers or weapon specifications appeared on the screen. There was only one line of text that read, "Do not engage under any circumstance." A murmur went through the crowd, and Yeltris waited for the question she knew would come. A young Drelkathi in the third row raised one of his muscular arms, and his gray skin seemed to darken with barely contained pride. "Commander," he said, and his name was Sorvin, and he had graduated at the top of his combat class. "I do not understand this warning, and my people conquered 3 star systems in the last cycle alone, and we fear no enemy." He gestured at the small red zone on the map. The humans have fewer than 200 vessels in their entire fleet, and their territory spans only 40 systems, and yet we are told to never engage them. He continued, "This seems like cowardice rather than wisdom." The other Drolkathi cadets made sounds of agreement, and their species was known throughout the galaxy for their warrior culture and their absolute refusal to show fear. Yeltris felt the familiar weight settle in her chest, and she had answered this question many times, but it never became easier. "This warning does not come from me," she said slowly. "It comes from the conclave of elders, and they have witnessed 10,000 years of galactic conflict and have seen empires rise and fall." She paused and let that sink in. In all that time, they have never issued such a warning for any other species. She added, "Not for the Vorlathi with their planet-killing weapons, and not for the Crescent with their reality-bending technology, and not for the Makrani who could destroy minds with a thought." Sorvin did not back down, and his pride would not allow it. "Then tell us why," he demanded. "What makes these humans so dangerous that the elders themselves fear them?" Yeltris was quiet for a long moment, and the entire hall seemed to hold its breath. "I cannot explain it," she finally admitted, "because I do not fully understand it myself, and the records are incomplete, and those who witness the truth directly do not speak of it." She turned back to the map and zoomed in on human space. "What I can tell you is this," she said. "Every species that ignored this warning is no longer part of the galactic community, and their seats in this assembly sit empty, and their worlds are silent." She pointed to several gray zones on the map that had no names or colors. These several worlds are silent. She pointed to several gray zones on the map that had no names or colors. Kathrani once numbered in the trillions, and now fewer than 800 of them exist. She said, the Vorlith sent their greatest fleet against a human colony, and within a decade, their civilization had ceased to function, and Makrani believed their psychic powers made them invincible against any physical species. Her voice dropped lower. The Makrani no longer exist at all. The hall was completely silent now, and even the proud Dralkathi cadets had stopped making sounds of agreement. The warning is not about what humans can do in a single battle. Yeltris continued. It is about what happens after, and it is about the kind of war they wage when they decide that an enemy must be destroyed. She looked directly at Sorvin. They do not fight to win, she said. They fight until the enemy can never fight again, and they do not stop, and they do not negotiate, and they do not show mercy once that line has been crossed. Sorvin met her gaze, but something in her eyes made him look away first. The warning is a kindness. Yeltris finished. It is the only kindness humans offer to potential enemies, and I suggest you accept it. She ended the briefing, and the cadets filed out in unusual silence, and most of them would heed her words, and they would stay far from human space for their entire careers. But Sorvin walked slowly, and his mind was churning with questions that would not quiet themselves. Was Dralkathi and his people had never run from any enemy, and they had built their entire civilization on the principle that strength and courage could overcome any obstacle. The idea that some small species with a tiny fleet could warrant such fear seemed impossible to accept. He thought about the empty seats in the assembly hall, and he thought about the Kathrani, reduced from trillions to hundreds, and he thought about the Makrani, who had simply vanished from existence. Part of him felt the first cold touch of fear, but a larger part of him burned with the need to understand and to see for himself what made humans so different from every other species in the galaxy. He would find the truth, and he would bring that knowledge back to his people, and perhaps he would prove that the Dralkathi were strong enough to face even this mysterious threat. As he boarded the transport that would take him to his first assignment, he made a private vow he would discover what the humans had done to earn such a warning, and he would learn why the conclave of elders feared them. He did not know that this decision would change everything, and that within 3 months he would understand exactly why the warning existed. He did not know that he would become one of the witnesses who carried the truth to future generations. He only knew that his pride would not let him accept fear without understanding, and that pride would nearly cost him everything. The boarding party consisted of 20 Dralkathi warriors, and First Officer Talvin led them personally through the airlock and into the silent corridors of the human transport. Sorvin watched from the bridge through the helmet cameras that each warrior wore, and the ship's interior was dark and empty, and their footsteps echoed against metal walls. Spread out and search every compartment, Talvin ordered. Find the crew and secure them for transport. The warriors moved efficiently through the vessel, and they checked storage rooms and crew quarters and engineering sections, but found nothing. Then Talvin's camera showed something that made Sorvin's blood run cold. In the main cargo hold, a single human woman sat calmly on a metal crate. She was small compared to the massive Dralkathi warriors who surrounded her, and her dark hair was pulled back from her face, and she wore simple gray clothing with no visible weapons. She looked up at them and smiled. "Hello," she said in perfectly accented Galactic Standard. "My name is Jinhee, and I have been waiting for you." Talvin laughed, and the sound was harsh and confident. "One human," he said. "This is what we were supposed to fear, and this is the great threat." That terrified our captain. He gestured to 2 of his warriors. "Restrain her and prepare her for transport to our ship." Jinhee did not resist as they approached, and she simply continued to smile. "Before you do that," she said, "I have a question for you, and it is important. You are in no position to ask questions." Talvin replied. "Did you receive the warning?" Jinhee asked. "The one about never engaging with humans," Talvin paused, and something about her calm demeanor was unsettling, even to his ambitious mind. "We received it," he admitted. "And you ignored it," Jinhee said, and it was not a question. "Drakathi do not hide from enemies," Talvin declared. "We face all threats directly." Jinhee nodded slowly, and her smile never wavered. "I understand," she said. "That is what the Kethrani said as well, and the Vorlith and the Makrani and all the others." On the bridge of the Unbroken Claw, every system flickered simultaneously. Svun lunged for his console as alarms began blaring across the ship, and diagnostic screens filled with error messages and warning lights. "What is happening?" someone shouted. Sorvin's fingers flew across his controls, and what he found made his stomach drop. Virus was spreading through their entire network, and it had infiltrated every system from weapons to navigation to life support, and it was moving faster than anything he had ever seen. "It came from the transport," he reported, and his voice was barely steady. "The moment we connected for boarding, it uploaded into our systems." Back in the cargo hold, Jinhee had not moved, and the warriors still surrounded her, but now uncertainty showed on their faces. "Your ship is no longer under your control," she explained calmly. "This transport is not a vessel in distress, and it is a listening post, and we have been monitoring your ship for 6 weeks. Talvin's confident expression cracked. "That is impossible," he said. "We know your communication codes." Jinhee continued. "We know your tactical protocols, and we know your command structure, and we know the name of every officer on your vessel." She tilted her head slightly. "We knew you would ignore the warning," she said. "Some species always do." On the bridge, the weapons systems went offline, and then navigation locked completely, and then the engines began powering down. Captain Mordith burst through the doors with rage and fear warring on his face. "What have you done?" he demanded of the bridge crew. "Sir, it was First Officer Talvin," Sorvin reported. "He changed course while you were resting, and now our systems are compromised." Mordith stared at the screens, showing the virus spreading through every part of his ship, and for a long moment, he said nothing. Then he opened a channel to the boarding party. "Human," he said, and his voice was strained but controlled. "What do you want from us?" Through Talvin's camera, they watched Jinhee turn toward the communication panel. "I want nothing," she replied. "I am simply the messenger, and the warning was real, and you chose to ignore it. We can negotiate." Mordith tried. "We can offer compensation for this misunderstanding." "There is no misunderstanding," Jinhee said. "You knew exactly what you were doing, and now you will see exactly what we are capable of doing in response." Proximity alarms began screaming, and Sorvin switched to external sensors. 12 vessels emerged from behind a nearby asteroid field, and they moved in perfect formation toward the helpless Unbroken Claw. Sorvin studied their configurations, and confusion joined the fear in his chest. "Captain," he said slowly, "those are not warships." Mordith looked at the readings, and his face went white. The approaching vessels were mining ships and construction tugs and cargo haulers and salvage craft. Not a single one carried military-grade weapons. "That is correct." Jinhee's voice came through the speakers. "Humans do not need warships, and we find other tools more effective." The first mining vessel took position above the Unbroken Claw and its industrial cutting laser powered up. Mordith finally understood, and the horror in his eyes was absolute. They were not here to fight. They were here to take his ship apart piece by piece while his crew watched helplessly. "The warning was a kindness," Jinhee said. "It was the only kindness we offer, and you refused it." The cutting laser activated and began slicing through the outer hull of the proudest warship in the Drakathi fleet. 6 months had passed since the incident in contested space, and Sorvin stood on the central platform of the Great Hall of Korath Prime, with the same hall where Commander Yeltris had once given him the warning he had refused to believe. Now he was the one delivering that warning to a new cohort of cadets, and the weight of what he carried felt heavier than anything he had ever known. He looked out at the young faces before him, and they came from 15 different species, and they sat with the same pride and confidence that he had once possessed. "I am not here to teach you tactics or strategy," he began. "Others will handle that training, and my role is different." He pulled up the familiar galactic map and pointed to the red zone that marked human space. 6 months ago, I was a junior tactical officer aboard the Galactic warship Unbroken Claw. He continued. "I was proud, and I was curious, and I believed that my people were strong enough to face any enemy." He paused and let the silence stretch. "I was wrong." A murmur went through the crowd, and several cadets exchanged glances. Sorvin brought up images of the Unbroken Claw as it existed now, and skeletal remains of what had once been a magnificent warship. "We encountered a human transport in contested space," he explained. "Our first officer believed it was an opportunity to capture prisoners and gather intelligence, and he ignored the warning and ordered our ship to intercept." The images shifted to show the human vessels that had surrounded them. "These are the ships that disabled us," Sorvin said. "Mining vessels and cargo haulers and salvage craft, and not a single military vessel among them." Young cadet from a species Sorvin did not recognize raised her hand. "How could civilian ships defeat a warship?" she asked. "They did not defeat us," Sorvin replied. "They took us apart, and they dismantled our weapons and our engines and our hull plating, while we watched and could do nothing to stop them." He showed the recordings from the bridge cameras, and the cadets watched in silence as the Unbroken Claw was systematically reduced to a skeleton. "The humans never fired a shot," Sorvin continued. "They had already won before we ever approached that transport, and they had spent 6 weeks monitoring our communications and learning our systems and preparing for the moment when we would ignore the warning." Another cadet spoke up, and this one was Galactic like Sorvin, and his voice carried the familiar tone of wounded pride. "But surely we could have fought back," he said. "Our warriors are among the finest in the galaxy." Sorvin looked at the young Galactic and saw himself from 6 months ago. "Let me tell you what I learned during those 6 days while we drifted toward home," he said. "The human who spoke to us was named Jinhee, and she explained why the warning exists." He brought up the historical records that Jinhee had shown them. "The Kathrani once numbered in the trillions," he said. "They attacked the human colony and killed every civilian, and they expected humanity to surrender in fear." The images showed the systematic destruction of Kathrani civilization. Instead, the humans spent 11 years dismantling everything the Kathrani needed to function as a society, Sorvin continued. "Not through massive battles or overwhelming force, but through patience and precision and absolute determination." He showed the final count of Kathrani survivors. "Fewer than 800 remain," he said. "And they serve as living warnings to every species that might consider attacking humanity." The hall was completely silent now. "The same fate befell the Vorlith," Sorvin added. "And the Makrani no longer exist at all, and a dozen other species whose names are only remembered in records." He pointed to the empty seats in the assembly hall. "Those seats once belonged to proud civilizations who believed they were strong enough to challenge humanity," he said. "Now they are empty, and they will remain empty forever." Cadet from a newly spacefaring species raised her hand, and her people had only achieved interstellar travel in the last generation. "What makes humans so different from other species?" she asked. "They have no vast fleets and no planet-killing weapons and no psychic abilities, and yet the elders feared them more than any other threat." Sorvin had asked that same question to Jinhee during those long days of drifting, and he remembered her answer perfectly. "Humans evolved on a world that tried to kill them every day," he explained. Disease and predators and natural disasters and other humans constantly threatened their survival. He paused. They did not survive by being the strongest or the fastest. He continued. They survived by being the most adaptable and the most persistent and the most creative when it comes to destroying threats. He looked directly at the young cadet. They do not know how to surrender, he said. The concept exists in their language, but not in their instincts. And when they are pushed past a certain point, they become something the galaxy has never encountered before. What is that? The cadet asked. Patient, Sorvin replied. Methodical and calm and absolutely certain of their capability, and they do not stop until the threat can never rise again. He remembered Jinhee's smile and the way she had never shown anger or hatred. That calmness is what broke the Kethrani survivor that my captain once met, he added. It was not the violence that destroyed his mind, and it was the realization that the humans felt nothing while they erased his civilization. He closed the historical records and returned to the simple galactic map with its red warning zone. I was allowed to survive for one reason, he said. The humans wanted a witness, and they wanted someone who could stand here and tell you the truth so that you would not make the same mistake. The young Drelkathi cadet who had spoken earlier raised his hand again. What if someone does not believe the warning? He Asked gestured to the empty seats that surrounded the hall. Those seats belonged to species who did not believe, he said. The Kethrani and the Vorlith, and the Makrani and others whose names are only remembered in records. He let the silence stretch for a long moment. No one survives learning this lesson twice, he finished. The warning is not a threat, and it is a kindness. And it is the only kindness that humans offer to potential enemies. He stepped down from the platform and a new instructor took his place to continue with tactical training. As Sorvin walked toward the exit, a young cadet caught up with him. Sir, she said, do you think humans will ever be a threat to peaceful species? Sorvin stopped and considered the question carefully. Jinhee told me something else during those 6 days, he said. She said that humans would rather trade and cooperate and build together, and they gain nothing from conquest, and they do not want war. He looked back at the hall, full of young officers who would carry this lesson throughout their careers. The warning exists because humans know what they are capable of, he said. And they do not want to become that thing again, and they would rather be friends than enemies. The cadet nodded. Slowly. So the warning really is a kindness. She said. Sorvin smiled, and it was the first time he had smiled since the incident. Yes, he replied. It is the greatest kindness a species like humanity can offer, and I suggest you accept it. He walked out of the hall and into the corridor where the light from 100 different stars streamed through the windows. Somewhere out there, the humans were going about their lives, and they were trading and building and exploring, and they were hoping that no one else would ignore the warning, because they remembered. Kethrazan, they did not want to remember another world that way. The human vessels worked with terrible efficiency and precision mining. Lasers cut through hull plating that had been designed to withstand. Military weapons and tractor beams tore away armor sections that had protected the ship through dozens of battles, and salvage claws ripped out weapon mounts that had destroyed enemy fleets. Sorvin stood on the bridge and watched his ship being dismantled around him. Crew had been herded into the central sections where life support would be maintained, and they could do nothing but listen to the sounds of their vessel being taken apart. Captain Mordeth stood rigid at the main display, and his hands were clenched so tight that his gray skin had turned pale first. Officer Talvin had been brought back from the transport, and he sat in the corner with his head bowed, and the ambition that had driven him was gone. And only Shame Remain Jinhee walked onto the bridge, escorted by 2 Dralkathi guards who could not actually stop her. Sorvin had watched them try to restrain her earlier, and their weapons had simply bounced off the personal shielding that surrounded her body. She moved with complete confidence, as if she were the commander of this vessel and not its prisoner. "Why are you doing this?" Mordeth demanded. "If you wanted to destroy us, you could have simply fired on our ship." Jinhee stopped in the center of the bridge and looked at the captain with an expression that held no anger and no hatred. That calmness was somehow more terrifying than any rage could have been. "Destruction is easy," she said, "but destruction does not teach, and we want you to understand." She gestured to the view screen that showed the human vessels continuing their methodical work. "Humans do not conquer," she explained. "We do not seek war, and we do not expand through violence, and we have no interest in ruling other species." "Then why?" Mordeth asked. "Because when war comes to us, we do not fight to win battles," Jinhee continued. "We fight to ensure the enemy can never fight again, and we fight to make certain that no one else will make the same mistake." She turned to the tactical display and brought up historical records that Sorvin had spent months trying to find. "Let me show you the truth about Kethros," she said. The images that appeared made several crew members look away. The Kethrani sent a fleet of 3,000 warships against a human colony on the planet Kethros. Jinhee narrated. The colony held 40,000 civilians, and they had no military vessels and no planetary defenses. Her voice remained calm and steady. "The Kethrani killed every man and woman and child on that world, and they broadcast the massacre across their communication networks as a warning to humanity, and they laughed as our people died." She paused. "They expected us to surrender after that, and they expected us to bow before their power and beg for mercy." The record shifted to show what happened next. "Instead, we spent 11 years dismantling their civilization," Jinhee said. "We did not send a fleet to meet them in battle, and we did not try to match their military strength." The images showed infrastructure collapsing and supply lines being severed and communication networks going dark. "We destroyed their ability to make war," she continued. "We found every shipyard and eliminated it, and we located every fuel depot and removed it, and we identified every command center and erased it." More images appeared showing Kethrani worlds going silent one by one. "We did not attack their civilian populations," Jinhee added. "We simply made it impossible for their military to function, and then we waited while their society collapsed under its own weight." The final images showed the Kethrani as they existed now, from trillions to fewer than 800. Jinhee said. "They begged for mercy at the end, and we gave it to them, but the mercy came with a price." "What price?" Sorvin heard himself ask. Jinhee looked at him directly. "They became living warnings," she answered. "They travel to every new species and share what humans can do when we are provoked, and they tell the truth about Kethros to anyone who will listen." Mordeth's voice was hollow when he spoke. "And what is to become of us?" Jinhee turned back to him. "You have not earned destruction," she said. "This crew ignored the warning, but the Dralkathi people did not attack human civilians, and there are no Dralkathi children dead on human worlds." She gestured to the view screen, where the dismantling continued. "This is a demonstration, and not a war," she explained. "Your ship will be left as a skeleton with life support barely functional, and you will drift toward Dralkathi space." "And then?" Mordeth asked. "Your people will rescue you in approximately 6 days," Jinhee replied. "You will have time to think about what you have witnessed and what you will tell others." She moved toward the door and then stopped. The elders who created the warning did so because they understood something important. She said, "Humans do not want war, and we gain nothing from conquest, and we would rather trade and cooperate and build together." Her voice hardened slightly. "But we are what our world made us," she continued. "We evolved on a planet that tried to kill us every single day, and we survived disease and predators and natural disasters and each other, and we learned that the only way to end a threat is to end it completely." She looked at each of them in turn. "We do not know how to surrender," she said. The concept exists in our language, but not in our instincts, and when we are pushed past a certain point, we become something that the galaxy has never seen before. What is that? Sorvan Askegenhi smiled, and it was not a threatening smile, but somehow that made it worse. Patient, she said. We become patient and methodical and absolutely certain of our capability, and we do not stop until the threat can never rise again. She walked off the bridge and left them alone with the sound of their ship being taken apart around them. Sorvan understood now why the Kathrani survivor had been broken. It was not the violence that destroyed the mind, it was the calm. 3 months had passed since the briefing at Korath Prime, and Sorvan now served as a junior tactical officer aboard the Drolkathi warship Unbroken Claw. The vessel was one of the finest in their fleet, and it carried enough firepower to destroy a small moon, and its crew of 800 warriors had won glory in dozens of campaigns. They patrolled the border region near human space, and their mission was simple observation and nothing more. But Sorvan had spent every free moment of those 3 months searching through classified archives and restricted databases, and what he had found disturbed him deeply. Records about humans were incomplete in ways that seemed deliberate, and files had been corrupted, and entire sections had been erased, and references to events simply stopped without explanation. One phrase appeared again and again in the fragments he could access, and it read the silence of Kachishos. He could not find any detailed information about what had happened at Kathros, and every search led to dead ends and locked files that even his security clearance could not open. Tonight, he had finally gathered enough courage to bring his findings to Bruce. Captain Mordith. Captain was a veteran of 40 campaigns, and his gray skin was marked with ritual scars that told the story of every victory, and he was the most respected warrior Sorvan had ever served under. They met in the captain's private quarters, and Mordith listened in silence as Sorvan explained what he had discovered. When the young officer finished speaking, he expected the captain to dismiss his concerns or to laugh at his curiosity. Instead, something happened that Sorvan had never witnessed before. Fear crossed Captain Mordith's face. It was only there for a moment before the veteran composed himself, but Sorvan had seen it clearly, and it shook him more than anything in the archives. You should not have searched for this information, Mordith said quietly. Some knowledge is buried for good reason. But Captain, Sorvan pressed, how can we defend against a threat we do not understand? And how can we call ourselves warriors if we hide from the truth? Mordith was silent for a long moment, and then he spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. I met a survivor once, he said, a single Kathrani who had lived through first contact with humans. Sorvan leaned forward, and this was more than he had found in all his months of research. What did they tell you? He asked. The creature was broken, Mordith replied. Its mind had shattered, and it could barely form coherent thoughts, and it spent most of its time rocking back and forth and staring at nothing. The captain's hands tightened on the arms of his chair. But sometimes it would speak, and it always said the same thing. He continued. It kept repeating that humans do not stop, and it said those words over and over like a prayer or a curse. What does that mean? Sorvan asked. I do not know, Mordith admitted. And I have never wanted to find out, and I suggest you let this obsession go before it destroys you. Before Sorvan could respond, the ship's communication system crackled to life. Captain to the bridge. The first officer's voice announced, we have detected an anomaly on long-range sensors. Mordith rose immediately, and Sorvan followed him through the corridors of the massive warship until they reached the command center. First Officer Talvin stood at the main display, and his eyes gleamed with an expression Sorvan recognized as ambition. Report. Mordith commanded. A human vessel, Talvin said. A small transport ship drifting in contested space, approximately 2 hours from our position, and its systems appear to be failing, and it is broadcasting a distress beacon. The bridge crew murmured. With excitement, in a human ship so close to their patrol route, was an unexpected opportunity, but Captain Mordith's face had gone pale. Set course away from that vessel, he ordered. Maximum speed, and we will report this to command and let them decide how to proceed. Talvin's expression shifted to barely concealed frustration. Captain, with respect, this is a chance to capture human prisoners. He argued. Think of the intelligence we could gather and think of the glory for our ship and our people. I said, set course away. Mordith repeated, and his voice carried the weight of command. That is a direct order. Talvin bowed his head in acknowledgement, but Sorvin noticed the anger in his eyes. The ship turned and began moving away from the drifting transport, and Mordith stayed on the bridge for another hour before exhaustion finally forced him to return to his quarters. Sorvin remained at his station, and he watched the transport on the long-range sensors as it slowly faded from view. He understood the captain's caution now, and the fear he had seen in Mordith's eyes had been genuine and deep. First Officer Talvin did not share that understanding 3 hours after the captain retired. Talvin returned to the bridge, and he carried himself with the confidence of someone who had made a decision. New orders. He announced to the night crew, "We are changing course to intercept the human vessel." "Sir," one of the officers said hesitantly, "the captain ordered us to withdraw." "The captain is resting, and I am in command of this bridge," Talvin replied. "When we return with human prisoners and valuable intelligence, he will thank us for our initiative." Sorvin wanted to object, but Talvin outranked him, and the other officers were already following the new orders. The unbroken claw turned and accelerated toward the drifting transport. As they drew closer, Sorvin studied the sensor readings with growing unease, and something about the situation felt wrong. The distress beacon was broadcasting clearly, but the ship's emergency systems were not active, and the power readings did not match a vessel in genuine distress. A ship that was truly failing would show fluctuating power levels and emergency backups cycling on and off. This ship's power signature was stable and controlled. "Sir," Sorvin said carefully, "I believe we should reconsider this approach, and the sensor data suggests this may not be a ship in distress." Talvin dismissed him with a wave of his hand. "You are too cautious," he said, "like the captain and like all those who let fear control them." The transport grew larger on their screens as they approached, and Sorvin felt cold certainty settle in his chest. This was not a ship in distress. This was bait, and they were swimming directly into a trap that they did not understand and could not escape.